Hey everybody, another one in Myogi. Once again, the same map. Like I said, you tend to get the same maps a lot because of the way that they're tiered. And this one is playing with Ren0 in his Phoenix. Now this is going to be a bit of a long video because there's some absolutely fucking magical Pubbie Masterpiece Theatre that goes on at the end of it. I was thinking of just cutting that out, but you've really got to see it. It's just mind-blowing. You may want to kind of steel yourself for it, otherwise you may lose all faith in humanity upon witnessing what transpires at the end of this match. Anyway, being in a battleship on New Dawn, I decide I'm going to head to the northeast, where I've got plenty of room to maneuver, not too many islands obstructing my line of fire, and I should have plenty of support. Ren0 runs ahead to scout, and you can see to my right there what the Myogi looks like when it is stock. Quite a substantial difference between the two. Now, instead of going up the 10 line like I did in the previous match, following the Napoleonic battle line, I actually cut the corner. This is really risky. I wasn't sure if it was going to work out or not. I was kind of expecting to eat shit from a destroyer or a cruiser perhaps, but it did actually work, somehow. Which is particularly surprising considering the enemy have 2 Japanese carriers, which means a lot of torpedo bombers. Already the enemy have got a number of ships coming this way. Not surprisingly, that includes their battleships. I go for some ranging shots on the Wyoming. I can't speak, but I pulled him too far ahead of him. He's actually travelling quite slowly. This is an annoying habit that pubbies have picked up. I think I've probably ranted on several World of Tanks replays about the infuriating habit pubbies have of stopping for no readily apparent reason, or reversing and driving forwards and reversing. You know that they're not doing it because of any kind of skill or awareness, they're just really stupid and kind of don't know what they're meant to do. This is the World of Warships equivalent. People will slow down, they'll stop, they'll reverse, they'll do it in open water where there's no cover to be heard of, and it'll make you miss the most frustrating shots. They'll be sitting targets, of course, for most of the time, but just when you think you got that perfect citadel shot on them, they'll start doing something stupid. It's really frustrating. But now I've got that little rant out of the way. A huge hit on that Omaha, and here comes a second. Boom. I bet he's reevaluating his life choices. Now, the reason those were massive Citadel hits, despite the shitty angle he appeared to be giving me, is because they actually hit him end on, and they just went straight through the bulkhead. If you do have somebody end on like that, it's kind of hit or miss whether you Citadel them. You need the shells to come in at the right angle. If the shells come in too flat, for example, if you're too close, you're going to go over the engineering spaces and magazines. If they come in too steeply, from plunging fire, you're just going to have them exit out through the bottom of the hull and just not really do much. So you've really got to get the right range on it. It's kind of luck. It's much harder to get a end-on Citadel than a broadside Citadel, but it does happen, and it's always funny when it does. Now, the St. Louis is making a nuisance of himself. He's going to probably keep me on fire for quite a while. That's what St. Louis's do. It's like the low-tier equivalent of an Atlanta. I decided to leave him alone, though, because he's only an annoyance at this stage. What I'd rather do is actually kill battleships, and there is no shortage of those around here. This Wyoming is looking pretty good. Unfortunately for me, I didn't check to see if my rear guns were unmasked or not, and so my shots go straight into the island. Only one shell finds its mark, and it barely does anything. That's okay though, because I've got plenty of time to work with here, and this guy is now well and truly out in the open. He's also somewhat spread out from his teammates, making him the obvious target. He's just too singled out. He is starting to turn though. I don't shoot right away, I want to wait for him to commit to the turn, I want to wait for a better angle. 6,600 damage isn't great, but I'll take it. And I also begin looking around to see what else there is. You'll notice there I was using my scout as well. Although there's really not that much need to on this map. It's just too small. In go some more hits on the Wyoming. Just over 7k damage that time. And a wall of torpedoes is making life really hard for these guys. It's just absolute chaos in front of me. One battleship sinks. This guy very nearly gets finished off, but the torps run out of range just before they hit him. I'm still well within range though, and am able to knock another 7,000 damage and change into his ship. There's still of course a full health New York between myself and my target, which is a bit odd, but oh well. My secondaries begin engaging the New York. They're relatively short range on the Myogi. I think they're only like 3 km, 3.5 km range. The New York has the same issues. There are a few ships with long range secondaries. Warspite, I think Congo, Fuso, Nagato. Basically all the Japanese battleships above tier 5. Warspite and the American battleships above, I want to say, tier 8, or inclusive of tier 8 of course. They all have 5 km or more secondaries. 5 km for most of them, 7 for Izumo and Yamato, and I think for Montana and Iowa as well. Now I've got a destroyer coming up my right side, which is a bit scary. I'm worried that it's going to put torps into me. You can see my secondaries on both sides firing. The secondaries are quite useful at close range against other battleships, because although they might do a lot of damage and they might not even hit half the time, they do tend to set things on fire. And so it's always nice to have your secondaries withering someone away with fire, while your primary batteries knock huge chunks off their hit points. And in fact, my secondaries there just finished off an enemy cruiser, who I didn't even realise was close enough to get hit by them. I'm quite badly on fire here, but it's going to burn itself out soon. The destroyer is having trouble hitting me, as are the squadrons of torpedo bombers that are attempting to kill me. Unfortunately, they do finally get one in before I can finish off the enemy New York. And this is where things start to go downhill, because with both myself and Ren Zero dead, it's up to the Pubbies to finish off the match. Now, I decided to sit and spectate this one, and my first port of call is the Hosho. Now, these Japanese low-tier carriers are really odd-looking things. They've got the funny little sloped ramp on the back, which is, I assume, to try and prevent pilots crashing into the back of the carrier if they undershoot. But more importantly, the Japanese seem to have taken the concept of flat top a little bit too far. There's no island whatsoever. I have no idea how the fuck you're meant to control the deck operations on this thing. And I also have no idea how you're meant to see where you're going. The bridge is actually tucked away under the this area here. In fact, I will go into the free camera. You can see the secondaries there. For close in defense, those are 140mm guns as found on the Kuma and the Iwaki. Anyway, this is the bridge. You can't even see the bridge windows from this angle. Just the corner of it there. So I have no idea how the fuck you're meant to see where you're going with all the struts and turrets and shit in the way, but I guess it made sense at some point. They are funny looking things though. So I'll have to apologise here because there's going to be a few minutes of me just sort of spinning the camera around admiring this guy's ship and then a whole bunch of nothing going on. I could cut it, but I won't because I'm lazy, and it also gives me more time to talk. But there's going to be some absolutely magical fucking Pubbie Masterpiece Theatre coming up, so trust me, you want to see this. Now, I did mention in my last video that the Japanese are very strike-oriented. There are a couple of reasons for this. First of all, the Japanese carriers tend to carry more aircraft. Historically speaking, the Americans had larger air wings on their carriers, but this is obviously something that Wargaming have done to try and give the Japanese carriers a raison d'etre. They need something that makes them worth playing over the Americans. Well, not over the Americans, but as well as the Americans. So they get this. And it's kind of an abstraction of the Japanese emphasis on heavy strike. Obviously, you know, with the whole Pearl Harbor thing and all that. So it does kind of make sense. The other reason that Japanese carriers tend to be oriented towards strike wings is because their fighters just do not fare well against the US fighter wings, particularly at the higher tiers. When the US start to really come into their own with fighters, you are not going to have fun fighting them. And so a lot of US carrier players will run fighter loadouts, or as they have become colloquially known in the games community, chemotherapy loadouts. Because, of course, they cure cancer, otherwise known as strike carriers. So here we have a Furutaka losing a lot of hit points to a torpedo. Getting hit by torpedoes in a cruiser is a bit embarrassing, but I'll cut him some slack. The Furutaka is very easy to hit because it's very long, and the reason it's very long is to support its astoundingly stupid gun layout. I'm not sure who thought this was a good idea, but it has 6 single gun turrets laid out in the most profoundly idiotic pattern I could possibly imagine. I don't know why. Now, the Furutaka was later upgraded to carry twin gun turrets, and it made a lot more sense that way. But for some reason, Wargaming have elected not to include that setup in the game, and so the Furutaka is stuck with its shitty 6 single turrets no matter how much you upgrade it. Here, our Myogi, already near death, manages to completely fuck up and turn the wrong way. Turns away from the torps rather than into them, thus guaranteeing he will eat every single fucking one of them. Don't do that. If in doubt, turn into them. Really, you should be turning into them anyway, because particularly if they're airdropped and they're close by, it gives you a much better chance of bouncing them off your side without them fusing, because of course they do have a minimum arming distance. And here we see our hero, Boston 31 in the New York. Now, this guy really needs to learn how to dodge torpedoes, because myself and Ren were just sitting here watching this beside ourselves. The enemies still have 2 carriers up and a destroyer. We have this guy and 1 carrier. Now, this guy's full health. In fact, I don't think he's even taken a hit yet. The enemy destroyer is, of course, nowhere to be seen. It is a destroyer after all. It's pretty likely the carrier is up in the northwest corner. Well, now we know where the destroyer is. Luckily for our hero, he is missed by about 10 meters. He's heading for the enemy cap. Not necessarily a bad idea, although he's going to be really struggling to cap out with 2 carriers, both alive. Both Japanese carriers, both having done quite well for themselves already. Here it comes. He isn't turning yet. He begins turning now. So he's waited until the bombers are already dropping their torpedoes before he begins turning, and he's turning the wrong way. If he had turned into the torpedoes, that one wouldn't have fused, that one might not have, and he wouldn't have hit these two. So he basically just fucked himself out of half his hit points because he doesn't know which way to turn. And I'm not focusing on this guy to try and be an asshole like, oh, look at this retard. Genuinely, this guy needs to have somebody tell him, look dude, turn into them. Well, actually, he did have someone telling him that. I think myself, Ren, and one of the other guys on the team were. But, you know, maybe one day. So having lost half his hit points, he now begins to actually turn around. He knows that the carriers are over there somewhere, and by God, he wants to kill them. Admirable spirit, perhaps, but I wouldn't count on it. However, with 4.5 minutes left, getting on cap is not really a bad idea. The destroyer will probably either run off to engage our carrier or try and engage this guy from outside the distance he'll be detected at, which is, you know, there's nothing you can do about that. Anyway, sure enough, there's a carrier. Here comes another bomber. Just one. He misses ahead of the carrier there, led it a bit too much, and luckily for him, that torp misses. Meanwhile, our own carrier is trying to sink the enemy one with his own torpedo bombers. Well, now we know where the destroyer is. Now, while I'm on the topic of destroyers and cloaked torpedoes, there are really only two numbers you need to know when you are playing a destroyer. They are the two most important pieces of knowledge you can have, more than anything else. The first one is the range at which the enemy will spot you. The second one is the maximum range of your torpedoes. Those are the only two things you ever need to care about when you're playing a destroyer, because usually there's a difference between those two of perhaps 500 meters, perhaps a kilometer, perhaps more. But usually your torpedoes will travel your torpedoes will travel further than you can be spotted if you are a Japanese destroyer. If you're an American destroyer, you're shit out of luck. You're going to have to brawl. But those are very important numbers to know because it allows you to ambush things without ever being spotted. And so if this little destroyer plays his cards right, he looks like a Minakaze, maybe a Mitsuki. Yep, Minakaze. If he plays his cards right, he could have just circled this guy shitting out torps without being seen. However, he's decided to go after the carrier instead, which is not necessarily a bad plan. It also means he's near our cap, although at this point it's a bit too late to start a cap afresh. This guy, meanwhile, is continuing to eat every single torp that comes anywhere near him. I'm actually impressed his ship ate so many without exploding. It now looks like he's about to drive out of the cap, and with 2 minutes now on the clock, that would doom us to a certain loss as opposed to just a very likely loss. Now, he's in a battleship, and battleships are very big and heavy, and they have this thing called inertia, meaning once it gets up to speed, it takes a fair while to slow it down again. So even though he's already stopped, he drifts almost far enough out of the cap to reset himself. Almost, but not quite. This was the most incredibly frustrating thing to watch. It was just unreal. I mean, I'm sure you guys are sitting there like, what is this guy doing? But when you're actually watching it in real time, trying to figure out what the fuck this guy is up to, and then you actively want to win because, you know, you figure you've done well enough. It's really just, ugh. Here comes another two torps. He's reversing. He's very lucky it took him so long to accelerate in reverse, otherwise he would have eaten both of those instead of just one. But it doesn't matter because here comes the finisher. Or so it seems. That rear torpedo just misses his rudder, and so he buys himself a little bit longer. The destroyer and the carrier managed to kill each other simultaneously, I'm assuming that the carrier rammed the destroyer or vice versa, leaving only this guy and the enemy carrier. Now, if he could spot that thing and get a shot on it, we could still win this game. Unfortunately, he can't see it. It's probably behind that headland by now, so he wouldn't have a shot on it anyway, and this guy just isn't even going to be in a position where he could see it.